Okay, so as always, I'll start off with the usual updates of stuff that's in the news that's relevant to our advocacy. So the important one, really, I suppose, is last Wednesday was the 1 year anniversary of the cuts to the UK's official development assistance or ODA budget, reducing it from 0.5% to 0.3% of the UK's gross national income, or GNI. And that's not, as we know, many billions of pounds or several billions of pounds off that budget. So most of you also know that it's by law that it should be 0.7%, but by now successive governments have ignored this and reduced the amounts of financial assistance that we give to other countries to help them address poverty, disease, malnutrition, etc. Now, I'm not going to say a lot more about that right now because it's be the topic for our guest speaker to address in a few minutes. But needless to say, that results continues to advocate for the amount that the UK provides to be increased to its proper level as soon as possible. And a big thank you, obviously, to all of you who've been really consistently campaigning on this over many years, and in particular, since 2021, when the 0.7% target was first deliberately missed by the then government. Last week, results signed up to a joint NGO statement by 97 NGOs about the impact of the most recent cuts. That's the 1 year on cuts. And I'm going to put a link in the chat box to the media coverage of that. Actually, we joined a lot of other people, as I say, saying that these cuts are having a lot of impact, and we're going to be talking about that later, as I say. Now, this reduction also hasn't gone unnoticed in Parliament, and its International Development Committee, or IDC, released a report quite recently in which it said that the cuts are actually happening too quickly. So that's these cuts over the last year. And they're advising the government to put pause onto that, um, really pending a review into how the focus on poverty reduction can be maintained in a reduced and restructured department. And again, in case anyone wants to have a look at that, I will. There's some good stuff in it, but there's quite a lot to wade through. But I will once again put that in the chat box, and that is coverage of the Parliament's own coverage, actually, of the International Development Committee's report. Next, I know many of you have expressed concern about the structural reasons why many lower income countries are unable to do more to achieve their own development goals. So that's beyond ODA, beyond aid. Um, and the things that might prevent them would be things like external debt burdens, tax avoidance by big companies, unfair economic rules, unfair trade rules, and so on. Now, some of you might recall back in September 2024, so that's what, 18 months ago or so now, results released a report on how debt repayments can, in many cases, far exceed the amount that countries are able to spend on health and nutrition combined. And we recently saw another report that confirmed this. That this time it was by CAFOD, and it was based on research by Save the Children, and I think the University of Edinburgh were involved as well. And it's saying how the UK could, if it wanted to, help countries gain the budgets they need by helping change the international rules around sovereign debt, which would more than offset the loss of funding created by the cuts. So again, I'm going to put a link to those for those of you who want to sort of read around that. And I'm also putting a link into the report that we produce in September 2024. Sorry, somebody else joining, just let them in. So as I also said, so that was debt. For those of you who are interested in that, obviously lots of people campaigning on that at the moment. As I just said, one of the other things that causes countries to have a lack of budget space for things like poverty reduction is what's known as illicit financial flows, where corporations deliberately and sometimes illegally remove profits from the country to avoid paying tax, often placing it in a tax haven, many of which are run by the UK. So this is a pretty outrageous aspect of our global economic system, which deprives countries of tax revenues, which are of course critical to the provision of publicly funded services such as health, education, etc. So our colleague Sunit Bagri, who wrote the Bad Loans Poor Nutrition report back in 2024, has now just finished a brand new report on illicit financial flows. I might have flagged that up before, but it's including what the UK specifically, given its role in the world, can do to remedy the situation. Now, it's being designed as we speak and will be launched now on the 7th of April. We can confirm that's World Health Day. So we'll be sharing that very soon, and we'll be devoting, assuming things go to plan, devoting our May campaign action to the topic in order to gain some political support for its recommendations. And the timing is also designed to help influence the UK's forthcoming Illicit Finance Summit, which is another international summit that it's hosting in London on the 23rd and 24th of June. So we'll be able to say a little bit more on this in due course, but we did want to just flag that's coming. Next, as many of you will know, 24th of March is World TB Day, and we'll be using that moment to launch another new report, and this time on the incidence of TB in the UK, which has been rising in recent years. So this is part of our strategy to make links between TB globally and TB in the UK to kind of help parliamentarians see the relevance of TB to them and to their constituents. Now, some of you may know that Results UK provides the secretariat of the all-party parliamentary group on global TB. And so we conducted an inquiry, organised evidence sessions in Parliament, and wrote a report on behalf of its MPs. This has been quite a lot of work for the relevant members of staff, and we obviously hope it will bear fruit later in the year as we promote the report with politicians, institutions, and academics, people like that. So again, watch this space. That's going to be out on World TB Day. And again, at some point, we think that there will be some campaigning action which you might want to contribute to around that. Okay. Normally at this point, I would hand over to Will for a roundup of your activities around the UK. However, he's on holiday. He's skiing. It's all very nice. So you have to listen to me for a little bit longer, I'm afraid. So I just want to go back to last month's campaign action. So the ask from us has been to think about visiting your MP on the government's what is now called the Global Partnerships Conference. We were calling it the International Development Conference, but it's now formally called the Global Partnerships Conference, and that's on the 19th and 20th of May. So May is looking quite busy. So obviously we want to gain political interest in this discussion, this important discussion with people across the world on the future of global development cooperation. Now we keep hearing sort of new bits all the time. So for example, there was the first official government press release was just last week. So we've posted that up on our website. So any new bits of information, such as the change of name, change of focus, that's been included on the webpage with the action materials. So again, I'm just going to put that in the chat box. You will obviously have had that last month. So you can rest assured that we're doing our best to keep the information updated. And there's an information sheet on that webpage that you can download and share with your MP so that we've got the best information that we can. But they've been kind of leaking out information on a fairly slow basis. So with that said, a big thank you to everyone who's working hard to get those meetings or to let their MP know about the conference. Last month, I think we heard about Deirdre, Ricky, Karen, who've been doing that kind of work so far. And also thank you to Pete, who's asked now for a meeting with his MP, Chris Vince, MP for Harlow, and Michelle in Putney, who's trying to meet with Fleur Anderson MP, just who I've heard about recently. Does anyone else want to share how they're getting on? I thought we'd spend a couple of minutes if anyone's got anything to share, or if not, that's absolutely okay. Hopefully people will, when they do get meetings, be able to share them, and the feedback. We always love to hear about it. So yeah, please do keep keep working away at that one, because it does a bit of a slog these days getting their offices to listen to you. So next, I want to just mention that this year is Results' 40th anniversary. this. So started in 1986, and I know there are one or two people on the call who've been here all of that time, or very nearly all of it, which is absolutely incredible. We want to mark this year with events and with we've got reflected in our branding and our website, for example, throughout the year, and to celebrate the amazing achievements of this network. And of course, obviously our staff as well, but the volunteers for many, many years. And to demonstrate what positive engagement with the political process can achieve for the eradication of poverty, hunger, disease, and inequality. So with that in mind, we're really keen to get ideas for what people would like to do, hear about any of your ideas. So I'm going to plant that with you just for now. One thing I did want to say, and this is a bit more of a sad announcement, is that we're not going to be able to run our summer gathering or have a national conference this year, which is very sad, obviously, in the 40th anniversary year. We simply don't have the resources to do it properly, and our board of trustees have had their say, and we've just had to think about it. And so we won't be doing that thing that we've been doing, well, the summer gathering we've been calling it the last few years. What we will be doing instead, though, we will be running the usual advocacy day on the Monday, and we've got that down now. We've got to hold the date for Monday, the 6th of July. So we will be doing what we can, as usual, to gain access to Whitehall departments in the morning. And in the afternoon, instead of the usual one or two meetings with supportive MPs, we're going to aim to have a reception event in Parliament where we hope to get more MPs along to discuss the importance of engaging with the public engaging with their elected representatives on global issues. For me, this is a really important topic of democratic accountability, and it's a way that we can sort of beef up that advocacy day, get a celebration in Parliament, and so we're going to be aiming to do that. So that's the plan at the moment. But apologies, the Sunday isn't going to happen this time. So I'm sorry that a lack of a full conference this year will be disappointing to some of you who are used to coming to London for the whole weekend and spending more time with each other. We will still be able to offer some financial support to people who want to travel to London for the events on the Monday and who may need to stay over. So that is an offer that we will put out there. For more details, more details nearer the time. But I just wanted to let you know what's going to be going on and what the plan is as soon as I could.
Naveed, Francesca's had her hand up for a little bit.
Oh dear, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Go ahead, Francesca.
Yeah, no, so sorry. I just had a question about previously about reaching out to MPs and stuff. I actually reached out to my MP maybe like a week and a half ago, and it was with a very particular issue that is going on right now with refugee families reuniting. I was wondering how often should one reach out to their MP if they don't hear back?
That's a great question. I bet there's a few views around this call. Does anyone want to give their opinion before I launch in?
Do you mean your MP hasn't replied to you, Francesca?
Yeah, no, he hasn't replied, and it's because there is so basically this is gonna be like a consultation because it's an issue that's been going on since October, and it's a particular case that is actually gonna be taken to court. So MPs have been called out to like give their perspectives and like to speak on about it, but my MP in particular hasn't. So I just want to know like is it worth like asking again, or I don't know how if that can be an issue.
Yes, definitely. I
I
think,
would say keep on asking.
yeah, especially if it's been since October. I mean, by all means, send a second email, but very often they get these days, we've been hearing back that they've always been busy, but in the last year or two, their inboxes just got really out of control, and their offices struggle with correspondence. And so, um, don't assume that things get read. If you don't hear back, even after just a week or even less if it's urgent, do feel free to phone up their office and tell them that what your issue is and why you want to either meet with the MP or get a response, and that will raise the issue in their consciousness. You'll also have the advantage of maybe getting to know the name of the office contact should you need them again in the future. So those are just some tips from me. I don't know if anyone else has got any thoughts.
Only one other thought, Naveed, which is that since Francesca is in Edinburgh, you already know this, Francesca, but if in doubt, you please feel free to call us, and we'll just we'll
100%.
do what we can to help, obviously.
Thank you, Ricky.
And
Just
Alex has got a
Also,
hand up as well.
a more
Just-
personalised letter might be good. Send them a nice greetings card with a handwritten note, so that you get noticed, if you know what I mean.
if you're chasing something up, phoning the constituency office is usually the best route,
I would,
because you'll get through to the caseworker, who will be the person who actually handles all of the correspondence. These days, it can be quite difficult to actually even get a phone number for a constituency office, just because of concerns about MP's safety. But the thing I found worked for me recently with my MP, who wasn't replying to my email meeting request, was actually commenting on social media. So they had posted something on Facebook, and I usually don't engage with any of this kind of stuff on Facebook. I barely go on Facebook, but I happened to be on Facebook, saw that they had posted, and I put a comment on that about how they hadn't replied to me. And like under half an hour, I had a response, and then I had a meeting. So I often find that basically, if they're not replying to your email, I don't think sending another email is necessarily that helpful, because it just adds to their to-do list. But finding a different method of communication, whether that's phoning or using some form of social media, I think is really, really helpful.
Okay, amazing. Thank you.
There's a few ideas there. Hopefully something like that will work. It's all about perseverance, I think, but thank you to everyone who's put some ideas in there. And sorry I didn't see your hand up for a while. Right, now, we're just going through things that have been going on around the UK. I wanted to shout out for Jill, who's just managed to get a letter published in the Tablet magazine on 21st of February. This is a publication with a really wide circulation, actually. So it was about the importance of working together in partnership to achieve the global goals using advocacy, which is obviously a really topical piece, particularly given the conference that we're about to talk about, or we're hoping to talk about to MPs. So massive thank you to Jill, and congratulations for getting a piece in the Tablet. Then the last thank you, I think, before we move on, is to say a big thank you to all of the UK-based grassroots advocates who joined other results grassroots campaigners from Canada and USA on Sunday, the 8th of February, to meet and share their experiences of advocacy. There were a few of us and quite a lot of Canadians, actually, but it felt like a good evening to me. But does anyone else want to say how they felt it went?
Oh,
Did someone? Who was that? Oh, Kathy, go ahead.
Yes, I attended, and it was really, really interesting to hear from both Americans and Canadians about the challenges that their countries were facing. And it was quite good to share some of the feelings that we had about our country and the lack of commitment to international development here as well. So we were able to sort of give some solidarity. So in the breakout, I felt it was a really worthwhile half an hour or whatever to talk to people who were doing the same sort of thing in different countries, but possibly similar situations.
Thank you, Kathy. Anybody else?
I thought it was, yeah, I agree with all of that. It was really interesting.
Thanks, Pete. We did a little quick poll at the end, and there seemed to be quite a lot of enthusiasm for another event. So I'll be working with colleagues from those other countries to try and see what the next event would be and how we can move that conversation on, because that solidarity across the globe obviously really, really important. So now I'm going to introduce our guest speaker for this evening's discussion to help us understand the latest on this topic that we're all sadly rather familiar with these days, i.e. the risk to the UK's international development efforts caused simply by the financial cuts. So I am really happy to be able to introduce our Director of Policy Advocacy here at Results, Alex Runswick, to share some of the latest intelligence on this. So you heard a chip in just a minute ago. Hello, Alex. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. It's really lovely to be on one of these calls again.
Well, thank you for joining us. So obviously we don't need to explain to you what this evening's call is all about. And many people will know you already, but just there are probably one or two who don't. So would you just be able to introduce yourself just quickly and say what you do at Results, and then we'll get into the usual questions.
Sure. So as Navida said, I'm Director of Policy Advocacy. So that means that I'm responsible for all of our policy work at Results. So that can mean managing the staff like Sunit that Naveed mentioned earlier, and who's writing the report on illicit financial flows. But it also means it's managing the team that does all of our evidence work basically, and we do the advocacy that's aimed not at parliamentarians, so not at MPs, but at the civil service or at big multilateral organisations, like, for example, the WHO or the UN. So, for example, a few years ago, we were doing work on the high-level meeting on tuberculosis, and the year after that, we also did one on antimicrobial resistance. That is all work that's done by the policy team rather than the parliamentary team. So it's all advocacy, and we all work very closely on it together. But I manage the evidence side of our work rather than the talking to MPs side.
Thanks, Alex.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Nice way of putting it, yeah. And I'm sure people will ask more in a minute. So let's get into the first of these kind of three questions which we've asked you to think about in advance. And the first one comes from Stort Valley. So over to one of you.
It's Corinne who volunteered, I believe.
It is.
Hi, Corinne.
Hi there, Alex. Thanks for that explanation. I didn't actually understand that difference, so that's really useful. What I wanted to ask is, and sadly, we know too much about this to some extent, but it would be good to hear from you. What has been the effect of the cuts that have already been made to the UK's official development assistance budget?
There are enormous numbers, and I could speak for hours on this, so I'm going to try and keep it relatively brief, and also to kind of cover three different issues. One is around kind of cuts to the work that can be done and how that impacts global health and education. One is around increasing instability and uncertainty, and the final one is about the impact on the UK and our kind of political influence and what we sometimes call soft power, which is the influence that we have around the world. That's just kind of the goodwill, the politics of it, the diplomacy of it. The big impact is obviously about the amount of work that anybody can do on any health, education, poverty reduction measure. I happened to be walking through security at Parliament when the announcement was made. We're escorting a senior member of Gavi's staff, and Gavi is the vaccine alliance that you will all know very well probably by now, because we were working very hard on their replenishment last year. But so we were hosting with other civil society colleagues a roundtable for MPs to encourage them to support vaccinations for children around the world. And the announcement was made just as we were walking through security to get to that meeting. And it's one of those things that you really remember where you were, because we were trying to process what that scale of cut means. And it's huge, because whenever a government announces any kind of cut, they always try and suggest that you can make it from efficiency savings, or you'll cut backroom staff, as if that doesn't matter. But when you've gone from 0.7 to 0.5 to 0.3, that's huge. You can't change envelope suppliers or make some kind of incremental cuts to everything to get to that kind of a level of a cut. You have to cut entire programs. So that means that there are significant things that we believed were important and that should be funded for global health and for education that we're now deciding that we just won't fund. And that can mean anything from access to drugs to what types of vaccines are available to people. It can mean what support is offered into countries when they're in conflict situations. It's easy when you say like a cut from 0.7 to 0.5 to 0.3 for it to feel very abstract. But what you're actually talking about is whether or not somebody who turns up to their doctor saying that, I'm really tired, I've lost weight unexpectedly, very suddenly, I've had cold-like symptoms for a long time that hasn't gone away. And the doctor thinks, well, they might have tuberculosis. There could be other things, but it's possible that they have tuberculosis. But when you have significant cuts like that, it's things like, can the doctor in that area of the world actually give them an accurate TB test? Do they have the money for the gene expert test? Because it's $5 a cartridge. No, sorry, $7.50, I think, a cartridge. And that's once you've spent however many hundreds of dollars for the actual machine. So each time it's decisions that impact individuals and their access to healthcare, whether or not they can get an education. And often the things that I find really fascinating about the impact of cuts are the things that don't get the headlines, because there's lots of statistics which are truly horrific about the number of lives that will probably be lost as a result of the cuts to ADA, not just from the UK, but around the world. But it's also the little things that you often don't think about with those big numbers. So when the US, when the Trump administration decided to cut the USAID department, and it was sudden, it wasn't a gradual thing. It was, the following morning, everything was frozen. One of the things that suddenly stopped was you could no longer transport the sputum samples that most low and middle income countries use for TB tests because it's the cheapest way of doing it, even though it's not at all accurate. You couldn't transport it from clinics to the lab to get it tested and then to get the results back. And on one level, that's a minor logistical hurdle that will be overcome at some point. It's obviously not as dramatic as the numbers of lives that will be lost, but it is also huge because that has enormous numbers of impacts for communities. So if you do have TB and your test is delayed, you continue to infect other people, not because you're doing anything wrong. You're doing the best you possibly can, and it's absolutely not the individual's fault at all. But you can't take the proper precautions. You can't get onto the right treatment correctly. So you can't start to get better, and your own personal outcome is likely to be worse. So there are all kinds of things that are all on a very human level that we lose sight of, I think, when we just talk about it cuts to ODA, because it is about, do teachers in classrooms have the materials they need to teach? Do they even, is there transport available to healthcare centres? Do healthcare centres have the resources they need to provide the nutritional support or the vaccinations? Sorry, I did warn you that I could talk for too long about this. So I'll move on to my next point. But the point is that I just really want you to take away from this. I know we talk about the cuts to ODA a lot, and it matters that we talk about it, but it's not because it's an abstract economic budget line. It's because real people in countries across the world are having their lives shortened, are having their lives made worse, are having reduced opportunities because of decisions that are made here. Very quickly, the greater instability point is that health and education work to end poverty isn't like producing widgets. It's not a question of you can decide to kind of reduce production this month and increase it the following month. You need long-term partnership, and you need to be able to plan. So there are lots of bad development stories of where one organisation goes in, builds a school, the school then fails because there's no money to keep they just funded the building, they didn't fund any of the teachers. Then another organisation will come to the same area, build a school in the same area, and do the same thing all over again. And short-term funding that is cut very quickly leads to that kind of development, which is bad for communities and a waste of money. And the other final point that I very quickly will make is about the loss of political influence of the UK. And the impact that decisions we make have abroad. So yes, the UK has cut its ODA, and that, speaking out obviously somebody from the UK, that, I think that's an appalling decision. But it also means that other countries then feel that they can do it too. So France has cut their ODA spending, Canada has cut theirs. And I'm not saying that that happened only because we did it, but it makes it much easier for other governments to do it too. But it also means that when we're wanting to work with countries that we have previously funded, we have or we want to comment on global issues, we have a much less influence because people say, well, you don't have any skin in the game. You're not involved in this anymore. So why should we listen to what you're saying?
Thanks, Alex.
Being too long, Naveed.
I know it's a big question, and I really liked the way you chose to answer that on the human scale. I think sometimes, we do see all the numbers, don't we? And you've reminded us that it's about individual people. That's why most of us are motivated to be on this call in the first place, because it's about people. So thank you for that. I know that many of you will have been following the news on this, whenever it's come up over the whole course of the last year. But I just put a couple of things, or three things rather, in the chat box in case they were relatively more recent. So the sort of a bit more on the sort of the number side of ways of measuring impact on people's lives that Alex just referred to. So there's been another, report about how many avoidable deaths might be caused because of the latest round of ODA cuts. That's one of the links. There's a link also to some cuts specific on the World Food Programme that was covered. Those two are in The Guardian. And then the last one I shared, an independent report showing that the UK cuts will have proven this year to have been even deeper than the USAID cuts. Obviously, USAID is a much larger pot of money, but we are cutting our budget proportionately deeper than the Americans. So other ways of looking at the answer to the question that hopefully complement what you just heard from Alex. But thank you for that really in-depth answer. I'm sure we'll come back to some of that stuff in a minute. For our second question, can we head over to Cheshire?
Yes, hi Naveed. Hi Alex. Thank you. I know you said you could talk for ages, but I could listen to you for ages as well. So thank you for joining us. Our question is, why do we think there might be even further cuts?
So there are several reasons. One is there's this big political event called the Munich Security Conference, where it's one of those big kind of high profile events where world leaders go and make speeches about the threats that they see for the world. And Keir Starmer used his speech at that event to flag up the fact that he felt that there were going to need to be further increases to defence spending. And obviously this was before the recent conflict in the Middle East. So we were obviously concerned that he was putting those signposts out. Last time when ODA was cut, it was framed as a choice between either you fund defence or you fund global health and education. That's not true. I'm not going to pick it apart on this call, but there is a lot we can do to challenge that narrative. But given that narrative does exist, and it's the narrative that Keir Starmer himself used when he was doing the cuts from 0.5 to 0.3, we felt that was a concern. And then there was also a story in the BBC. We don't, know what their sources are, so we don't have confirmation of it. But there was a story on the BBC suggesting that in order to increase defence spending, the government was once again cut ODA. And we felt it was really, really important that the government and MPs heard as soon as possible about the impacts that this would have, because for all of the reasons I've just spoken about, but also because there are pledges that the government has already made that if they cut the budget even further, they won't be able to deliver. So, the government celebrated the fact that it was its pledge to Gavi that I mentioned earlier, that does routine vaccinations for children, was the largest of any single country. And it really enjoyed getting all of the praise for that. But if you continue to cut ODA, then it's going to not be able to deliver on that. And that, but not only, as I said, has, the impacts on children's lives that I was talking about earlier, but it also impacts on the UK's global political influence and the trust that other countries have in us. So that's why we felt it was really important that it was flagged up as early as possible.
Thanks, Alex. So yeah, we don't know what they're thinking in government, or which political figures are thinking what, or what their motivations are, whoever it was who leaked their opinions to the BBC. But we are concerned, and I have put the link to that BBC article in the chat. That was the real thing that made us sit up and take notice and think, should we actually say something sooner rather than later? Let's move on to the third prearranged question, and that's from the online group. Go ahead, Jill. Oh, you're on mute.
That's it. I'll go back to it now. Right, we seem to have been advocating for this for a long time, that it be increased to its proper level. Why do you think government might change their minds now?
So I've been a campaigner all my life. I grew up in a very political family so campaigning was always, part of my life. But I've been professionally doing campaigning and advocacy for over 20 years now. And one of the favourite excuses for MPs for not taking action on an issue is that, it's not raised on the doorstep, or they haven't received any letters about it. And that isn't always correct. I have known, specific examples of where I know people have written to a particular MP and they've still got up in Parliament and said, well, no one's written to me about this. But that whole narrative around this isn't an issue that people care about sorry, excuse me, I just need to cough for a minute. Allows politicians to be off the hook. There's no real political cost to either not protecting ODA or to not putting it back up to the correct levels. They need to feel that pressure. So that's why I think it's really important that we take action. Sorry, I just need to cough again. Always really helpful when you're on a call and your cough decides to go into overdrive. So one is that they need to feel the political pressure around it. The other thing is that governments, whenever they make some kind of cut or they make a decision, take a decision that they know isn't going to be popular, they plan for the fact that it's not going to be popular in the short term, but they rely on the fact that it will die down fairly quickly and we will move on to other things. So one of the reasons why, again, I think it's important that we take action now is so that they realise that actually we're not going to go away. We might not get an instant response in terms of the return to 0.7 for ODA, but what we're saying is we haven't forgotten, we're still watching, there is still going to be a political consequence to this, and you are still going to have pressure on this. And the third reason I think it's really important is actually, so on one hand, we're putting on pressure to our elected representatives, which is obviously a very important thing to do in a democracy, and it's a really important part of the accountability mechanism. But we're also creating the political space and for them to take action within their own party. So by us putting pressure on our MP can then in an internal party meeting or can go to their government minister and say, look, I understand the pressure you're on with the need to increase defence spending, but I have heard from a large number of my constituents and they are really passionate about this. And if we don't do something on ODA, then there are going to be consequences. So it's not just that it puts pressure on the MP, it's that it also gives them the political cover they need to go and raise it with other people.
Thank you, Alex. And again, we can unpick some of that. So it's not just about, going back to 0.7 and thinking that now is the time that that's realistically going to happen, but it isn't, but that we're playing the longer game, saying what we think in the longer term for the reasons that Alex has just outlined. So, Alex, thank you for those initial questions about the huge consequences that we're already been seeing from this cut from last year, and which could potentially get worse. And hopefully, you know, we're wrong about further cuts, but we have to be concerned. So now let's open the floor to any questions that you've got. As always, just unmute yourself, ask your question directly, or you can post your question in the chat box. Or alternatively, if you find it more convenient to text the question to me, my number is 07906 662 571, and I will try to keep my eye on my texts as well as the chat box. So over to whoever wants to ask a question.
Can I leap in?
Please do.
Please. When before, not the last election, but the one before that, one of the consequences that we talked about of actually getting rid of DFID was that there was going to be a brain drain of civil servants. I see sort of little mutterings about the dismantling of the Department for Overseas Development within the Foreign Office, and that people are leaving in droves, you know, that and you're never going to get that back. Would you just say a little bit about the consequences of that and why you think it's happening?
It's happening because of budget cuts. So obviously the ODA budget has been cut, as we've been speaking about, but it's not just that has been cut. It's obviously staffing costs as well. So the FCDO has been going through a redundancy process. Well, sorry, not a redundancy process, a restructuring process. It started at the most senior levels of staff, and it's basically working its way down. It's been going on for many months, and I think it still has many months to go. So staff working at the FCDO have obviously had a very, very difficult period. Many of us, including obviously Naveed and myself, have been through similar processes. And even if your job is safe at the end of such a process, it's a really horrible thing to go to. So that's one of the reasons why the cuts are happening. Also, they're thinking, you know, they're reprioritizing what they do with their ODA spending. So, for example, they're moving teams, they're merging teams, or they're moving teams into new areas, and some people will just decide, actually, this isn't what I want to do, or this focus isn't what I want to do. But I think you're right to be concerned fundamentally about the impact of all the staff changes. Obviously, it's difficult from an advocacy point of view because it means that you're having to build new relationships all the time. I've been working at Results now for 4 years, and I think the FCDO has basically been restructuring in one shape or form for all of the time I've been here. Not on this scale, but there have been, you know, mini team restructurings and things like that going on for a very, very long time. So you're right that there's like institutional knowledge that goes. It's harder to build relationships. People don't understand the type of work that you're talking about. So yeah, there are lots of long-term impacts. But we'll have to see. We won't know for a while what the long-term impacts are, I'm afraid, but it does make everything harder.
Thank you, Alex. We have a question in the chat from Pete. I will read it out for those who won't be able to see the chat. So, is it too off the beaten track to try to relate my concern about ODA to the public concern about immigration? I see a direct link, but is it an argument with clout for the PM or my MP? What's your view on that?
I think it is, and it's one that has often been used by the sector as a whole. There's often been, it's often kind of phrased along the lines of, if you solve the problem in the country, then you won't get the population moving here. So particularly in terms of climate, but it's not just climate, it's also development more generally. But if you improve climate resilience in country, then people won't be displaced by natural disasters, for example, is a version of that argument. More recently, I've heard MPs being quite skeptical about that in terms of reducing poverty, because it's something that is said very often, but they're not persuaded that there's actually any evidence that that's true. I still think, you know, in terms of a letter from a constituent to an MP or to the Prime Minister, I would absolutely still make it. But if I have to say, as a policy person, if I was going into a meeting with an MP, I would want to make sure I had significant evidence to back it up before I said it. But I think in a letter from a constituent, you get given a lot more leeway than I would. And if it's something that you are, the most important thing in any communication you have with your MP or the Prime Minister is that it's something that you care about and it's your thoughts and feelings. So absolutely go for it.
Thanks, Alex. I'm just going to put something on a similar theme, really, into the chat. So there's some research just put out from the One campaign. So this is, again, it's that balance of interests. Like, if you do this, then you get a benefit back, which can be a good argument. And the One campaign have just put out this research talking about how development assistance being reduced will actually decrease global security and counteract any increases to defence spending. In fact, they're saying that they've got data to show that increasing defence spending out of proportion to development spending is actually unhelpful. So I just thought that might be an interesting side argument to the one that you've just put forward, Pete. I think.
Sorry, can I just follow up?
Please,
is there actually a lack of evidence when speaking to an official body? You're saying, they would say there isn't that much evidence for that, for the link. And I'm surprised. I thought there was plenty of evidence.
It can be difficult to prove a direct causation. So it's not that there's no evidence. It's just, I think it's particularly when an argument has been made for a number of years, people kind of get a little bit skeptical and say, well, you always say that, but like prove it. So there is definitely some evidence that you can use for that, but it's not always easy to provide a direct causation. If you invest along the lines of, if you invest £1 million in this community, you will then not get Y number of refugees. It's that kind of link is very, very difficult.
Thank you. Kathy, do you want to go next?
I carry with me something which I cut out of Private Eye a year ago because it quotes that on Hansard on the 13th of July 2021, when it went from 07 to 05, Keir Starmer was able to say that it matters that we keep our promises to the world's poorest, particularly at such a time of global uncertainty. He says, Britain has a moral obligation to help the world's poorest. And I wondered how political we could get in quoting back his views on taking 0.2% off the aid budget when he was in opposition compared to what he has done in the last year, which I know results is a charity, but how much can we refer to something like that where he was as horrified as we are when it was the Tories doing it?
We can absolutely make that point. That isn't something that would, that from a charitable point of view, well, certainly you as an individual writing to Keir Starmer can absolutely do that. We as an organisation could certainly also say that. We would have to balance it out in other ways to make sure that we were behaving in a genuinely cross-party manner. But merely factually pointing out what somebody said a few years previously compared to what they're saying now, that is absolutely legitimately charitable work, given that it is on our core business. And yeah, I would be very keen to do that personally.
Thank you, Kathy. I hadn't spotted that. It's amazing how you forget things that happened. That doesn't seem so long ago, but that is amazing that you carry that around. Was that the 13th of July 2021?
Apparently it was Hansard for 13th of July 2021.
Great. I've just taken note of that. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. Corinne, you've got your hand up.
Yes, Alex, there was an article here saying that actually the analysis of the UK aid cuts, the independent article, at 27% are greater than US aid cuts, which is horrifying. But I also thought that I'd read, maybe in the Independent recently, that there seems to have been some rolling back on some of the US aid cuts. Have I imagined that, or is that so that in a sense would widen it even more, widen the gap even more?
So the situation in terms of the US is very complicated because some of the spending has returned. So obviously the Trump administration completely scrapped the USAID administration, so our equivalent of DFID. And that functionality, the bits they decided to keep of that moved into the State Department. So there were some really big high profile cuts. And also because they, as I mentioned earlier, they immediately froze all spending. So even money that had already been pledged, contracts that had already been signed, that very minute, everything stopped. So it was horrifying for people on the ground because nobody knew if they, would still be able to employ people the following week, or if drug supplies would still turn up, or, all of those things. So it was the US aid cut was very, very significant and very, very dramatic. Whereas ours was less dramatic in the sense of it was a parliamentary announcement and so it didn't get quite the same level of media coverage, but in impact it has been quite similar. So in terms of the US spending, there are some they have shifted their focus. So for example, the prime focus of the US at the moment is on life-saving treatments. There is a long conversation we could have about how life-saving is being defined. But what that means is that some organisations are getting similar amounts of money, but they're not being allowed to spend it on programmes that they would previously have done. So often that means that, for example, programmes that were around supporting community engagement work, supporting, for example, TB survivors to do work with communities to make sure that they're taking their drugs properly, to make sure that they have education. And we know that this makes a huge difference in terms of ending stigma, in terms of increasing success rates for treatment. Excuse me, I need to cough again. And so there's lots of work around kind of supporting CSOs, supporting communities, which is exactly what you need to do to be able to get to hard to reach communities, to get to what we, in immunisation terms, we call zero dose children, which are the hardest to reach children who haven't had any vaccines. So it's things like that CSO work, working with communities that has been cut, whereas what they have deemed life-saving is still funded. So, for example, you may still be able to get a country may still be able to get access to TB drugs, just to keep with the TB example, but whether or not it will actually get to the communities, whether the communities will have confidence in taking it, is a very, very different question. There are also enormous numbers of restrictions now in the US in terms of what their funding can be used for more generally, that again, I won't go into on this call because it's a big conversation, but it's a complicated situation.
Thank you. And I know that the Congress is also fighting back on some of the cuts, or sort of trying to restore some funding. So again, you might remember back a colleague, Lisa Marshall, back at the beginning of last year, spoke to us as soon as those cuts had happened, and they were working on that. So it's been quite a long process for results in the US. I can see we've not got many minutes left, but I do have to go to a question from Karen, because I think it really also very importantly links back to last month's action request on this conference that we're asking you to raise with your MPs. So Karen's written, the government cites things like partnership, diversifying finance, local leadership in their statements about the conference in May. Is that all soft soap, or is there really something useful to be had in pursuing those kinds of outcomes? Alex? It's a bit of a difficult one to answer with only 3 minutes left, but I'm going to ask you to give it a go.
It's the kind of thing that can be incredibly positive, but I've spent a lot of time in the last week talking to international partners that we work with very closely on how we can potentially use this as an advocacy moment. They are all hugely skeptical. The universal response is like, oh great, we're getting another compact. That's, that's what we need. We need another statement with like no accountability and no targets. So there is definitely potential. And I certainly think we have to push on it and we have to make the best out of it that we possibly can. But I completely understand why you might think it was soft soaping.
Great, thank you. So there you go, covering 2 months campaigns actions for the price of one there. I think we've run out of time. So if you're able, you might have seen I've just put the action materials for this month in the chat box. That's the same link as was sent to you in your email just last week. So if you are able to write to the Prime Minister on this very important topic, whether or not you quote his own words back at him, as Kathy will be, that's up to you. I hope that you those of you who plan to meet your MPs as well may be able to mention this to them, as well as mentioning that Global Partnerships Conference that's coming up in May, because obviously that political pressure will also be influencing the Prime Minister as well. As always, do let us know how you get on, and thank you. Alex, thank you so much for your expert answers and filling us in on the latest on this fast-moving topic. And obviously, we're doing our best in a situation where we don't actually know what the government's thinking about. But one thing we clearly do know is the huge risks that this poses to people around the world. So thank you so much for bringing that to life. As usual, we'll keep this call open after the formal end of the meeting for up to an extra half an hour. So if anyone would like to stay and chat informally, please do, especially anyone who's a bit new to the call. We'd love to meet you and chat. But if you're not able to stay, enjoy the rest of your evenings.